Hey all, so in this video we'll be talking about setting up text styles in Figma, and we will start with a little bit of theory. So the first one is picking your typeface in case you don't have one already. So if you're like me and you don't have much of like graphic design background knowledge or just familiarity of working with typefaces, your best bet is to try to not be too creative and pick what's already popular, what you see a lot, something that's probably sans serif, because those tend to be more readable, especially if you have one typeface for your entire product. And yeah, you can start with one. You don't need to go overboard. And in fact, it's better not to have more than two or maybe three, but yeah, don't do more than two. So I have some examples here that you can pick from, and but in case you do decide to go with your own, a good thing to keep in mind is make sure that whichever typeface you are picking, that it has at least 10 styles. And a style means like it has like light, normal, semi-bold, font weight, and then it has italics, and then the combination, so kind of like italic, semi-bold. And the second thing is whichever typeface you pick, you want to make sure that it's legible. For example, if we take a look at these two typefaces here, Inter and Joseph & Sons, you can tell that the letters are very, very, very short, and which makes it much harder to read. And this is also known as looking at an X height of a typeface. So we can literally look at the height of an X character in these two typefaces. For example, here you can tell that X is pretty much just like a half of this E, which is very, very short. But then if we look at Inter, it's like more than 3/4 up. And just comparing these two paragraphs side by side, you can clearly tell that this one is much easier to read. And lastly, you want to make sure that the letters aren't too tight together. Like this typeface here, it's very condensed, and again, it's hard to read. So again, if you compare this to Inter, there is much more breathing room. This doesn't mean that you can't use this two typefaces. Maybe it would be more appropriate for things like headings, but not to be used as your main typeface. So the second thing is the scale. So as you set up your text styles, you are going to need quite a few sizes. And the good idea is to have maybe like between 7 to 11 sizes, maybe more depending on your use case. But in terms of setting up a scale for those font sizes is you don't want to get too mathematical and try to follow something very precisely. And as a simple example here, like you wouldn't want to do a simple linear scale where you pretty much just go up by 2 pixels, like 14, 16, 18, 20, etc. And the reason you don't want to do that is because even though it makes sense logically, it doesn't really make sense when you look at your scales. So for example, when looking at the difference of 2 pixels between 14 and 16 pixels, obviously 2 pixels is contributes to much greater difference. But then if you just look at 24 versus 26, at that point, those 2 pixels, that don't really matter as much. So a good idea would be is to instead kind of handpick your scale and have a smaller difference with smaller font sizes. And then as you get more into like the sizes that you would be using for your headings, you have greater difference. So again, I have 14 and 16 here, but then as the font sizes become larger, there is a greater difference as well, like 24 to 32, 32 to 40, it's 8 pixel difference. And an important thing to note is that, yes, I'm working with pixels here in Figma, but then of course, once you set this up in the development, you'll be working with rems. So here we can just assume that 16 pixel is 1 rem. Next one is naming. And again, the simpler is better. I like this method that I got from Tailwinds. So here you just essentially just have like text dash and then the size, like text small, text base, or you can also use text medium, text large, etc. And I like this much more than trying to assign some meaning to the name, for example, like caption, paragraph, heading. And the thing that can get confusing about headings is that people might start linking it to the H1, H2, the HTML heading tags. And you don't want that to happen because it can either lead to errors or create confusion. So for example, let's look at this layout here. And this layout is technically our ideal use case scenario. And here we just have our heading 1 style, heading 2, And then in each of these two sections, we have 3 cards with heading 3, and the HTML tags like seem to line up very nicely, which is, again, this is the ideal case scenario. But then what happens if, let's say, we have a similar layout, but it doesn't have this like second level heading? So the correct thing from the development perspective would be is to have the H1 heading, and then we'll use H2 tags here, but we'll still use the styling class of like the heading 3 here. So that is the correct way of doing it, but it's also kind of confusing because you have like H2 and then heading 3. It could lead to some confusion. But then what can also happen, which we really don't want to happen, is if you have someone accidentally thinking, okay, like this is H3, the class is named heading 3, so what we're going to do is just use the H3 tag here. Or even worse, they might just take this style and assign it to the H3 tag by default. And the reason this is wrong is now our tree structure goes straight from H1 to H3, and that's incorrect. Like we should always have one H1 tag, then H2, and then H3s are nested under H2. So if we have a totally different naming system, kind of like text, dash, and size name, then it's much more difficult to make this arrow or to create confusion. So this would still be our first layout here, H1, H2, H3, and then our second layout would look like this. Next, font weights, and I think having 3 is gives you enough flexibility. One thing to keep in mind though is that it's a good idea to skip level between like your normal font weight and whichever one that you want to be your bold. So in this example here, we have enter, but then we have 300, 400, 500. And if you look at this sentence, like it's very hard to tell that this phrase is bolded. But then if you look at this example where we have 300, 400, 600, you can clearly tell that this stands out much better. As for the light font weight, I don't think you really need to skip a weight because most likely you're probably not going to be using the light font weight in the paragraph setting like this. You'll most likely use it as a standalone on its own. And the another thing is that if we were to do like 200, it would probably be too light and too difficult to read. So that's why it's okay to have 300, 400 for your light and normal font weight, but then you would probably want to skip a level to get your semi-bold. And the last bit of theory is the line height, which should be inversely proportional to your font sizes. So when you have a smaller, like a paragraph font size, you should have some more breathing room, so larger line height. And then once you get into your headings, it should be smaller. So for example, from 150 for a paragraph to 120 for a heading. So this looks more organic and natural than if you have something like this, where you just have 150 for any font size. So the paragraph looks normal, but with the heading, it does feel like a little bit too much space between the two lines, especially if for whatever reason it starts dropping to like the third line. So this was the theory part. Now we're going to jump into an empty Figma file and we're actually going to implement the text styles in Figma, and I'll just be using what I have in these examples here. So I'll be using Inter as the typeface. I'll have 3 font weights, light, normal, semi-bold, and then I'm also gonna have, I think it's 7 font sizes. So I'm going to start by creating a text layer, and I'll call this one text small. And I think we're starting with 14 pixels, so I'll just bring it up to 14. I will do all of the regular font sizes first. So let's copy this one. This one's going to be base. And actually, I think it's a great idea to call it text base instead of text medium, because then it's very clear what's the default font size. So this one is text base and it will be 16. Next one is going to be text large. And that one is 18. And then we have text XL. That one is 20. Then we have text 2XL, and that one is 24, so going up by 4 pixels. Then we have 3XL, that one is 32. And 4XL, that one is going to be 40. And now what we need to do is to adjust our line heights. So for text small, it's going to be 140. Text base and text large are going to be 150. Then extra large is going to be 130. And then 2XL and 3XL are going to be 120. And 4XL is going to be 110. So now that we have our normal font weight, what I'm going to do is just make a copy and then update this to light. And then we'll make another copy and we'll update this to semi-bold because we're skipping a weight. From here, we're going to update the names of these text layers a little bit just so it's easier and faster later on to create all the text styles with the Styler plugin. So what I'm going to do is, again, highlight all of these ones and rename them. And I'm going to keep the current name, but then I'm going to do a slash and write semi-bold, which is the font weight. And then exactly the same thing for the normal. And the same thing, except it's going to be light. And one more thing that I want to make sure is I can just quickly group this and I just want to make sure that the light font weight group is all the way at the top, and then we have the normal, and then very last we have semi-bold. Again, it will help with the text style organization once we run them through a plugin. Okay, so now we can actually just ungroup this. And now the best part is quickly creating all the text styles with the plugin. So what you're going to do, you're going to select them, and then you're going to go to plugins, and you're going to search for Styler, and then you're going to click Generate Styles. And as you can see, it created 21 styles, and it has the small, the base, the large, and the font weights are in order. We have light, normal, semi-bold. The only thing that I would adjust here is just have my smallest font sizes at the top and then the largest ones at the bottom. As you can probably tell, we did spend much more time discussing the theory and what the scales and the font weights, line heights should be, and the actual technical part of implementing text styles in Figma becomes much faster once you have all that foundational stuff figured out. So the last thing, just like we did in the color styles tutorial, it's a good idea to create something that's more visually telling for somebody who just jumps into this file and is trying to figure out at glance what's going on. What we can do is create a style guide, and for that I'm just gonna go back to plugins, and the plugin that I'm going to use is called Typography Styleguide. And this one, you literally just run, and it's going to make a new page. And in this page, you are just going to have all your text styles, and it's gonna have all the font weights and examples. And one thing that you may want to do here is for all these font sizes, just to update this to rems, or you can do rem and then maybe pixels in the parentheses, again, assuming that one rem is 16 pixels. And this is just like an extra level of communication that you do want this to be implemented in rems. That's really it for text styles. So one thing, I am going to leave quite a few articles and books that you can check out to learn more about typography. Those materials have really helped me to figure out what's going on because, again, I don't have that background. And I hope that you will find them useful as well. Like always, I will leave the link to the Figma file in the description. And please let me know if you have any questions. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.